Mike. Mike, it's time to wake up.
What?
You got to do the video.
Video?
Yeah, the video.
No, someone else to do it.
Who am I going to get to do it?
Everybody. Get everybody else to do it.
Well, what am I supposed to tell them?
Tell them to pick any movie they want. I don't care. It doesn't have to be horror. I just don't care. Any movie they want. It's just whatever they think is like a hidden gem they want more people to know about. Because everybody else can do it. All right.
Hey there, creepy peeps. My name is NightmareMaven. Thank you so much, Mike, for asking me to be on your channel to talk about an underrated movie that I love so much. Over the years, Trick or Treat has become just a widely, hugely popular anthology horror movie that takes place around Halloween, right? Everybody loves Trick or Treat. I think Trick or Treat deserves the love that it gets, but there is one other horror Halloween anthology that I feel like nobody talks about enough, and it needs more eyeballs on it, as Mike put it. And that is Tales of Halloween. Tales of Halloween consists of 10 short stories by 10 different directors that are all taking place on the same Halloween night in the same suburban town. Because there are so many short stories in this anthology by so many different people, I feel like we get a really wide range of the feeling of Halloween. Halloween is a very special blend of like whimsy and fun, but it's also got a dark and scary and sinister side. I feel like these two things meet and we have Halloween. And I feel like these 10 short stories really all kind of encompass that vastly different ways. There are so many different crazy stories going on in this anthology. Some of them feel very like urban legend-esque, which I also kind of feel like goes along with Halloween. Like we have the people that put like razor blades in the candy and things like that. We have a little bit of urban legend storytelling. We have some more, I guess, like supernatural. Even one in particular, which is one of my favorite ones, The Weak and the Wicked, which kind of plays like a Western, which I really love. There's even an alien slasher mashup. I know that sounds weird, but this movie is worth it alone for that short, which is called Friday the 31st, and it has possibly the cutest claymation little trick-or-treating alien ever. Probably the only tiny claymation trick-or-treating alien ever. There's even more realistic stories. Like there's one called This Means War, where we have two neighbors on either side of a street that are battling it out to have the best Halloween display. And there are other shorts like The Ransom of Rusty Rex and The Night Billy Raised Hell that are so incredibly like whimsical and just like kind of a wicked glee, which I feel like is totally Halloween. So even though all of these shorts are made by different filmmakers, it still feels really cohesive. And we do have one thread that kind of connects all of the stories together in the form of a radio DJ played by Adrienne Barbeau, who's kind of reprising her role from The Fog. This is just a really fun and unique horror anthology that I feel like people don't talk about enough because we're too busy talking about Trick or Treat. And I don't think we need to stop talking about Trick or Treat, but we also just need to start talking about Tales of Halloween as well. Totally underrated. If you haven't seen it yet, please do this October. It is free on Tubi right now, so you really have no excuse. You should watch it. Thank you again, Mike, for letting me guest on your channel for a little bit. I hope you all have a very happy Halloween, and I'll maybe see some of you very soon. Bye.
When Mike reached out and asked if there was a movie that I think is underseen, that's kind of in the shadows and nobody talks about, I was going back and forth with a few different things like The Barn or Funhouse Massacre. But one movie that I've never seen many people talk about in general is Ghostland, or Incident in a Ghostland. This is one of those movies that I feel is a must-watch and almost on the blind. So I'm going to try and explain certain elements without giving too much away because there is a lot in this movie. So first of all, this is written and directed by someone very known in the new French extremity, 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽𝗺, who's most known for his film Martyrs from 2008. And while this movie may not be as disturbing as that one, it's disturbing in a different way. The basic premise is we have a mother and two daughters, Beth and Vera, who inherit a house. They decide to go check the place out, and they read that there's been a bunch of home invasions in the area. On their way, they see a creepy woman in like a candy truck, which rightfully gives them the spooks a little bit, but everything else seems pretty normal. They go to the house, they hang out for a while. Sure enough, the home invaders have followed them back and start to terrorize the family. We've got the candy truck woman who's all in black, and we've got the fat man, who's just this big hulking beast that just wants to play with his dolls. What I'm going to say next is going to sound like a massive spoiler, but I assure you it isn't. The movie is much more than what I'm going to explain here. The family fights back against the intruders and ends up killing them. Beth decides to leave the home and she just goes away. 16 years pass, she's now a successful writer. She's written all about the incident in a ghost land and is now a pretty popular author. She gets a phone call from her sister saying that she's still in the house and she needs help because the intruders are there. And that's all I'm gonna say about the story. It's a must watch, it's one that nobody talks about, and it's best to go in blind. It definitely sounds that I'm giving you more information than needed to watch this movie, but I assure you I haven't even scratched the surface as to what happens. This is a movie I feel just flew under the radar for a lot of people, or people just passed it up because 𝗘𝗾𝘂𝗶𝗽𝗺 was the director, and Martyrs was kind of disturbing, so maybe people thought that this would also be disturbing. It is, but not in that graphic sense. But the environment and the atmosphere and just the mood is just very creepy and weird, and especially if you don't like dolls, because there's some dolls in this movie. It should be stated this isn't an extreme film, so if you're hesitant about that, you shouldn't worry. There are some definitely triggering moments, but overall, even if you watch horror casually, I think you'd still enjoy this, so I would highly recommend Incident in a Ghostland.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Tanner, and I'm from The Horrible Show here on YouTube. And before I get started, I really just want to thank Mike and everything that he does with Rotted Reviews of Rotted Entertainment. I really hope that you're enjoying what he has content-wise this month, because I know it's going to be a blast. Before I get into my pick, the story behind this is that Mike reached out. He was like, hey man, if there's any kind of hidden gem movies in the horror genre, and then he said really any genre. So I was like, I got to talk about the Corn Dog Man. There's so many, I think, low-key horror movies that I could talk about, but I've literally never met anybody else that has seen this movie called The Corn Dog Man. So The Corn Dog Man came out in 1999. It is directed by Andrew Shea. So if I could preface this movie a little bit, back in 1999 was before smartphones. So you really only had a couple of options when you were calling people. Let's say if you had one house line, didn't want anybody calling you, you would have to pick up the receiver and just leave it busy. And then nobody could really get through. You couldn't block a number. You couldn't do anything like that. So this movie, The Corn Dog Man, is about a racist boat salesman in South Carolina that gets a phone call at his business about a boat inquiry. And then he gets another phone call. And then another phone call, and then 10 more phone calls, and then 100 more phone calls by the same guy. And I think some movies are definitely a little bit more in your face. You got some racial content in here, some very intense imagery too. The beginning of this movie needs an opening from Rod Serling, because it really feels like an episode of The Twilight Zone to me. And there was a wonderful time back in the late 90s and the early 2000s that had this really homegrown vibe. And Twin Peaks might be responsible for that. So you had movies like Gummo. You have movies like The Station Agent, which is really good. That's with Peter Dinklage too. I recommend that one as well. But this movie uses really warm tones. It feels like the summertime in South Carolina. And I love that. And I feel like a lot of those warmer tones were used. This was a Sundance selection from 1999. And I was first introduced to this movie from my dad. He would literally pick up anything from Blockbuster. And I remember being 8 or 9, and he'd be like, all right, let's watch this. Super obscure. I think you're going to have a lot of fun. And there's something about a movie where if you have a character or characters that are blatantly evil, like bad people, there's something that the director does that can kind of make you feel sorry for them, and then you kind of try to reevaluate who you are Do you still have empathy for this really, really terrible person? Who knows? And I want you to think about that too. The acting by the main character, Noble Willingham, is amazing. I think he did. I can't believe I was watching some interviews and he is not that person. He is such an amazing character actor. And then the role that he put together is absolutely, and he's hilarious in it too. So that's it. That's my pick. Hidden gem that I haven't seen anybody watch is The Corn Dog Man from 1999 by Andrew Shea. I want to give a huge thanks again to everybody that watches Rotted Reviews of Rotted Entertainment. And a huge thanks to Mike for having me on the show.
Thank you so much, Mike, for inviting me onto your channel to shine a light on an unseen hidden gem, to talk about a film I think hasn't had the recognition it deserves. Admittedly, I'm not someone who kind of goes off the beaten path, so to speak, that much when it comes to watching films, but there is a film that comes straight to mind when I think of a hidden gem. The film I've chosen to talk about is so rarely talked about. In fact, I never hear anyone talk about it, ever, despite the fact that it's a solid addition to the found footage subgenre, which is a subgenre that I'm a massive fan of. So for my pick, I've gone with the 2020 psychological thriller MOM, Mothers of Monsters. The film follows Abby, a single mother to a teenage son named Jacob. When Abby finds increasing evidence that Jacob is plotting a school shooting, she starts spying on him by installing cameras within the home and recording her interactions with him. So I stumbled across this film randomly, and because I'd heard nothing about it before, my expectations of it were pretty low. However, I was so pleasantly surprised by how well done and effective this film is. I was just glued to my screen the entire time, and I was just so invested in this super volatile mother-son dynamic. The film's premise is based around this mother's desperate attempt to document her struggles and hopefully give other mothers who are dealing with a similar situation a resource to refer to. Being a mother myself to a young son, this whole scenario is pretty nightmarish, to say the least. The way the film is set up, being filmed in pretty much the same location and on what I assume is a shoestring budget, makes it that it relies heavily on the performances of the two main cast members, and both actors absolutely knocked it out of the park. This is perhaps the biggest highlight of the film, but it's worth watching just for the performances alone. Melinda Page Hamilton, playing concerned single mom Abby, does an awesome job coming across as this woman with all these conflicting feelings about her son. Her character is written well and most definitely flawed in a lot of ways, and Melinda Page Hamilton was just a perfect fit for the role. Opposite her, we have Bailey Edwards playing deranged, apathetic teenager Jacob. He really leans into the role and does a phenomenal job at getting under your skin in a really big way. As mentioned before, this film is categorized as a thriller, but it most definitely toes the line of horror with some truly shocking moments and with some of the dark subject matter that it explores. If you're a fan of found footage and all things dark and disturbing, this will be right up your alley. It most definitely deserves more recognition than what it's received, and it's a great example of just because a film hasn't had much attention doesn't mean that it should be disregarded. Thanks again, Mike, for having me on. I'm really enjoying your series, and I'm just so grateful that you invited me to have a small part in it.
Hi, I am Patrick, and I'm here to present to you Martin Scorsese's underrated gem, After Hours. And hi, Mike. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored. After Hours, 1985, directed by the one, the only, the legendary Italian-American superstar director Martin Scorsese. During the 80s, Scorsese had one film in mind that he wanted to do, his passion project, The Last Temptation of Christ. But that's a long story how that film would not happen for another couple of years. So, in the meantime, between Raging Bull and The Last Temptation of Christ, he made 3 other films. He made King of Comedy, After Hours, and after that, The Color of Money. We're here to talk about After Hours. Have you ever been out and you just had a bad night, you just wanted to go home, get in bed, get a good night of sleep, but something just wouldn't let you go home, like maybe you missed a bus or you don't have money for a cab? This is the film. But this is not the film where you just miss the bus, take the next bus. This is the film where you're living out the worst night of your life. In simple words, After Hours is about a regular guy going on a date and just having the worst night of his life, trying to get back home. The film starts with our protagonist Paul in his work environment at his office. After work, we see him sitting at a diner reading a book, and then a girl walks up to him and she gives him her number. And then he goes home, calls her, "Hey, what's up?" And she invites him over. He takes a cab, and then the first bad thing happens to him. The cab driver is driving insane, and Paul is holding up his money, and the money flies out of the window. And it was the only $20 bill he has, so he could not pay for the cab. And then he's at the apartment with the girl, but they just don't vibe with each other. And he wants to leave, he wants to go home. He wants to take the subway home, but he has not enough money. And weird and bizarre things just happen throughout the entire night until he maybe gets home, or maybe not. I don't want to spoil anything. But it kind of goes full circle in the end. And the film also stars Rosanna Arquette, John Hurt, Catherine O'Hara, yes, Kevin McAllister's parents, before they were Kevin McAllister's parents, and Cheech and Chong, not as Cheech and Chong, but they're in there. Very underrated film in Martin Scorsese's filmography. It's a dark comedy inspired by Hitchcock and Franz Kafka. He intended the film a little like a parody and an homage to Hitchcock and his style, and also Franz Kafka. If you're into dark comedy, bizarre stuff, macabre, I think you will have a great time. I think it's Scorsese's hidden gem that people do not talk about enough. For me, it gets a perfect 10 out of 10. I highly recommend this film. And if you can, I would recommend watching the film after midnight. It just adds to the experience. Thanks again to Mike for having me, and have a nice day.
Hi, my name's Emma. I'm also known as Spooky Astronauts here on YouTube, and today I want to talk to you about The Uninvited Guest. This Spanish psychological horror thriller will have you on the edge of your seat, guaranteed. Guaranteed. The film tells the story of Felix, a recently separated architect who lives alone in his house. One day, a strange visitor knocks on his door and asks to use his phone. But when this stranger enters, Felix turns his back, goes to another room, and when he returns, the visitor is gone. And he's not sure if this person ever left. Felix's anxiety grows as the film progresses. He's in this constant state of panic and paranoia, feeling like someone is watching him. But there's a lot more to this story, full of spoilers, so I will not go there, but I promise you, it is not what you think in the most creepiest way possible. The reason I spoke about this film is because I was doing research recently this year on Spanish thrillers and horrors that are underappreciated. And this one I only heard about a couple of times on some messaging boards, and I had to dig into it. And when I watched it, I was so surprised because it is such an original outcome and very unique the way it structures itself. There has been a film recently that kind of takes off this idea, but not as well. And I just think that it needs to get in front of more audiences. I think a lot of people who are looking for a unique structure in a film that will surprise them, a film that's just a little bit different, will find that in many Spanish horror thrillers, but particularly in The Uninvited Guest. The film comes from Guillermo Morales, the same director as Julia's Eyes. And although the unique aspect is more of the structure and the overwhelming paranoia within the film, back when it was doing its festival rounds over a decade ago, it was nominated not for the script, but for the acting. And Monica Lopez was the center of this, who is one of the main characters, and she did win one of these awards for Best Actress. I wanted to just put that little bit of information in there because not Not only is it well structured, very interesting and compelling, but the acting in it is phenomenal. So if you're looking for a twisted ride that is severely underestimated, I recommend checking out The Uninvited Guest from 2004. Thank you so much to my friend Rodder Reviews for having me on your channel. It was a great honor, and keep watching for some more underrated gems.
Rob here from Exploitation Reviews. Do you like slashers? What do you think the first true slasher was? There might not be any definitive answer to that question, but today I want to tell you about one that is a contender. The Touch of Her Flesh from director Michael Finlay. It came out more than a decade before Halloween, and yet it still contains all of the major slasher tropes. Leering POV shots, one brutal killer, he targets mostly women, super hot women. He's in a disguise, the kills are various and creative. The killer sometimes makes sarcastic quips as his victims are dying. There's even a final girl. Check, 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 check. The Touch of Her Flesh checks all of these slasher boxes, and it checked them all before Halloween, Black Christmas, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Torso, and even Bay of Blood. The story here is simplicity itself. Richard Jennings, who's played by the director Michael Finlay, he catches his wife cheating on him, and he snaps. He turns his hatred for his wife to all beautiful women. So when he crosses paths with a beautiful woman, and brother, let me tell you, the women in this movie are beautiful. But whether she's a go-go dancer, a stripper, or even a working girl, Richard Jennings is a murderer, and when they cross his path, murder's what happens. This film was a huge hit with the grindhouse audiences on 42nd Street, so much so that the following year he released 2 follow-ups, and they are even more twisted and insane than this one. Way more insane. So why haven't you horror fans seen this? Well, this isn't a horror movie. This is a roughie. What's a roughie? Here we go. Did you know there was a time in America when porn was illegal? Yeah, I know, and thank busty Jesus this happened before I was born, but it was. Up until the late 1950s, the only way to see naked people on screen was in these nudist camp films and these medical documentaries. Neither of these were very sexy. The nudist camps were populated by old flabby people, and the medical documentaries were populated by gonorrhea. But we were all saved in 1959 when Russ Meyer, who was exploiting a Supreme Court ruling, released the immoral Mr. Tease and created the Nudie Cutie. These were basically comedies with lots of nudity. And importantly, the nudity differed from the nudity in the nudist camp and medical pictures by being hot. It was a massive hit, and the gates were open. Over the next few years, tons and tons of nudie cuties would hit the theaters. They were sweet, innocent, and profoundly stupid films. And in all of these films, the women are put on a kind of pedestal. Look, but don't touch, just admire this marvel of nature. Well, people got bored with that pretty quickly and said, instead of marveling at this body, why don't we take it off the pedestal, put it in the cellar, wrap it up in some leather, and beat it until it's bloody. The roughie was born. Yeah, in 1964, nudie films got kinky. They got rough. And when Michael Finlay set his twisted mind to the task of making a roughie, he took out the beatings and the bondage and replaced it with murder, and the slasher was born years before the slasher was actually born. So if you like slashers, but you think they could be even sleazier than they already are, you might be ready for the work of Michael Finlay. You might be ready for The Touch of Her Flesh.
And Mike, you totally don't you can edit this out. But I always wanted to do this. Hi, this is Tanner in Post. Just saying, before the next time you watch a horror movie, or any movie, make sure it's good. And rot it. I'm so sorry, bro.